So when we talk about multiple interactions and eating or getting eaten, then we talk about food chain. We know since our standard 5th and 6th that food chain talks about the process of eating something or getting eaten, right? So it is a continuous distribution of energy and organic matter throughout multiple trophic level chains. Okay, so it is process of being eaten and eating. Now there might be two different kind of food chains where usually we start with producers, okay, primary producers, and then they are being eaten by herbivores and then carnivores and super carnivores and so on. We know that we usually take into account that food chain. It is also called as grazing food chain. So it is present in all the ecosystems, might be terrestrial, might be aquatic. Now other part is detrital food chain, where the detrital food chain talks about the organisms which are not producers. Okay, grazing food chain usually has producers in the lower level or the primary level, whereas in detrital food chain, the detritus or the dead organic matter or the organic matter is the primary source. Okay, so they are taken up by decomposers which are being fed by the carnivores, right? So this is the detrital food chain where there is less or no amount of producers that are present, or then that is usually taken up by decomposer chain. So the detritus usually get by the left out matter of the entire systems and food chain, but it is still a source of energy for all the detrital food chain participants. Now they are interrelated because herbivores are eaten by carnivores of detrital food chain, and there is exchange, and this entire interaction is called as food web, where multiple participants are eating each other, and there are not one particular source or one particular chain, but intermingling of multiple participant and multiple factors. So that is food web that we know. Now the thing is, when we talk about ecological pyramids are the quantitative representation or graphical representation of how biomass and energy moves from one trophic level to other. Okay. Now the thing is, ecological pyramids, as the name suggests, looks like a pyramid where the base is usually of the producers and the top is of the consumers. Okay. So usually you increase from the producers and go upwards towards the consumers. So there are multiple kinds of pyramids. That is, we can talk about pyramid of energy, where the coins of interaction is energy. I mean, when you are talking about how much of energy is being utilized by different levels. Now there is pyramid of biomass. Pyramid of biomass talks about how much of biomass that is being produced by multiple levels and being consumed and is transferred on and so on. And there is pyramid of numbers, which talks about what is the number of producers and the producers and the consumers and setup. Okay, now the thing is, in all these ecological pyramids, the pyramid of biomass and pyramid of numbers can be either upright or inverted. Okay, I mean, there are few organisms or few examples where the primary producers is lower than that of the consumers. Let's say a huge large tree, okay, big tree. So that is the primary source of food for multiple organisms. So let's say the producer is one, the large tree is the producer, then there are a few organisms or the herbivores that are eating, let's say they are in 100 in number, then the carnivores that eat them are 1000 in numbers. Let's say one tree, there is grasshopper, and then there are frogs or multiple organisms that eat them combined, right? So all the carnivores are combined together to form the particular system. So not only one carnivores or one consumer, but multiple consumers, right? So this is the pyramid of biomass and pyramid of number. You can tell about that. For giving an example of pyramid of biomass, let's say there are small organisms like algae, okay, or phytoplanktons. So there the biomass is pretty low. Okay, so biomass is measured with respect to the particular of gram per meter square. So the biomass of the algae that is produced is pretty low. The biomass of phytoplanktons that is being produced is pretty low. Then that of the zooplanktons, then that of the feeders of, let's say, multiple carnivores and fishes, and so on. So you can find inverted pyramids in case of biomass and numbers, but in case of energy, you won't find that. It will be only upright. So usually the energy is transferred from primary producers and they have the highest amount of resources or the energy resources. Then the next levels usually consume that and get a chunk of it, a portion of it. And the portion is mentioned with respect to 10%. Now, Lindman's 10% law states that only 10% of the energy is transferred from one trophic level to other. So when we talk about energy, it is usually stored in the form of biomass, right? It is usually stored in the form of biomass and is transferred from one particular generation of trophic level to other. So usually when we talk about primary producers, they have the highest amount of or available energy because they are being producing that. So there is few energy that is lost in the entire process of acquiring it or let's say using it, and 10% is stored, and that 10% can be utilized by the secondary consumers. And among the 10%, the 10% of the stored energy utilized by the secondary consumers, and so on. So you can just get an idea. You know about this to get a rebrief. Moving forward, when we talk about how amount of biomasses and energy is transferred from one particular trophic level to other, there is exchange of nutrients, and then there is death and decomposition. Okay, so they all are happening in particular cycles where a particular system start with plant. Okay, they are being utilized by animals. The animals are eating them and are getting dead. So they are being dying on the surface of soil, which the decomposers are using to survive, and they eat up all the tissues and then produce nutrients in the soil nutrients, and they work out that nutrients for the plant. So you know the basic cycle. The available nutrient intake and uptake. So the intake and uptake of nutrients depends on how much of productivity of the plant system, as well as the environmental factors, as well as the available organisms in that region, right? So high nutrient availability refers to high nutrient uptake, high leaf nutrient concentration, high productivity, and high intake as well. And low nutrient availability talks about low nutrient uptake, low productivity, and low exchange. So yeah, so there are multiple ecosystems. Let's say in a forest ecosystem, you will find a high nutrient availability scenario where the high intake and uptake happens. So the cycle remains in sort of equilibrium. Let's say in desert, there is low nutrient availability. So low number of organisms and low nutrient uptake will be functioning up. So you need to understand that if there is high amount of nutrient, that doesn't mean the system is working pretty. So you need to understand that if the amount of nutrient that is available is pretty high, that doesn't mean that the production will be high as well. As because the production is higher, then the utilization will be also higher. Demand and supply, right? So the available nutrients is produced that has been intaken by organisms or consumers as well. So there is always a cycling system that functions out. So nutrient cycles function in a multiple manner where high nutrient availability refers to high nutrient uptake and intake. So low nutrient availability, we'll talk about low nutrient uptake and intake. So this is an illustration of understanding how systems inside the plant and root tip and all function out. You have idea about how soil fungi and soil bacteria utilize the dead organic matter, producing the nutrients which are taken up by the plants in the form of exudates, and they push up to form glucose, and these glucose is stored in form of biomass which is utilized by the animals, and again when the animals die, they again come back to the soil in the form of different setups where they are utilized again to produce nutrients. So there are multiple organisms that feed on that, right? So there are nematodes, there are protozoas, there are bacteria, there are fungi, and so on.